This is Know Better with your host, Kipper Jones.
Good evening and welcome to Know Better. I am your host, Kipper Jones, and you are watching a man live his dream. Thank you for tuning in. Let's start off with our first segment, which is a recap of last week's show. We had the awesome opportunity to have Miss Latasha Brown on, and she gave us a lot of information about voting and our voting rights and where we're headed. But in the state of Georgia, like many other states right now, our primary election, which was scheduled for March 24th, has been postponed to May 19th. Georgia State Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said in a statement Saturday that in-person voting and in-person early voting, which began statewide March 2nd, will be halted and the election will be moved to May 19th when Georgia's other 2020 primary elections are being held. So that means that we will have another period of voter registration between now and April 19th, providing that we are able to get out and do that at some point. But our new elections are going to be held. Our new primary election, the tentative date is now May 19th in the state of Georgia. So everybody, please make note of that there will be no more early voting. Of course, this past Sunday, a lot of us were going to do souls to the polls, and that was halted because they're the restricted voting schedule now. So please make note that the new election, the new primary election date is May 19th in the state of Georgia. All right. Secondly, we were able to talk to Ms. Bernita Smith in our first episode about the 2020 census. And at this point, many of us have received our first census mailings from the United States government. And I am really stressing that we have to pay attention to the census and what it represents. Like I said, it's congressional representation, it's funding for your local and state governments, but more than that, it's your legacy for your descendants. Your descendants are going to go to Ancestry.com and look for you, and the information they're going to find is going to be right there in the census. So please participate. Please get all your folks to participate in the census. We really need to get that going, and you should have your first, I think we got our second mailing so far, so you should at least have your first mailing in regards to the census. Now, I want to talk about where we are right now in our lives. It's an interesting place. It's an unprecedented place for many of us, unless you were alive during the yellow fever era, which I doubt that anybody was, especially anybody tuning into this show, was around to hear. But this is an unprecedented era with new phrases and words being introduced into our lexicon, like social distancing and which I had never even heard of before. And I never knew that you were going to have to tell people to wash their hands, but we have to not only wash our hands, we have to wash our hands more. We're in an unprecedented era. I have a friend who used to talk about the zombie apocalypse, and I told him he was crazy, and I had to call him yesterday and apologize, because it looks like we're headed to some uncharted territory that we've never seen. There's a group many of us in Georgia know very well called REM, and they had a song that really detailed it well. It's the end of the world as we know it. So to that end, I just want to call in a friend of mine who was so kind to take out of his time to come and assist me with talking about where we are right now. This segment is called Coping in a World of COVID-19. My friend and brother, his name is Dr. David Melbranch. He's a Black same gender-loving educator, author, activist, and internal medicine physician. He co-hosts the YouTube series Revolutionary Health that I've been a guest on many times as part of the Counter Narrative Project, and also appears on the Ask the HIV Doc video series. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, my brother, Dr. David Melbranch. Thank you for helping me out. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't even really know where to start. There's so much conversation and just this whole change of our lives. One question that came to me through people that knew that I was going to have you on tonight, and I'll start here, and then I'm going to let you just roll with it because I know you've been doing a lot of conversation and a lot of research in the field.
Right.
Is what makes the coronavirus different from influenza, from the flu, from the regular flu?
Well, I think there are a lot of differences. And I mean, you kind of have to start off with coronavirus in general. And I think when we say coronavirus, a lot of the phraseology that's being used in the media, we say a novel coronavirus, and novel meaning new, also meaning that we've never seen it before. And what's happening, a lot of people are getting confused and thinking that this coronavirus 19, and when you think about COVID-19, it's coronavirus VI 2019, when it was first discovered. They're thinking it's in the same family as the family of coronaviruses that just cause real mild upper respiratory infections. And that's not the case. This is something new that we haven't seen before. And it's usually spread through mammals and then mammals to humans. But now what's happening is that it's become human to human through respiratory droplets. You do have to think about how it's different from influenza. And how it's different is that it has a longer incubation period, usually about 2 to 14 days, with an average of about 5 days. And influenza actually has an incubation period that's a lot quicker, like an average of maybe 2 days. So people, when they get exposed to influenza virus, they get sicker a lot quicker. And then some of the features, while they overlap, they're not entirely the same. So with the regular influenza virus that we see, and it's important to note that every year there are new strains that come out, and we have new vaccines that are kind of targeting each strain. But the symptoms that you see with the flu are things like fevers, headache, maybe sore throat, muscle aching, those kind of things. And people feel really wiped out. With COVID-19 or the coronavirus that we're seeing right now, this new novel one that we don't really know too much about, the symptoms of fever and kind of muscle aches and fatigue also are part of the picture. But then what differentiates it a little bit from the flu is that people are getting short of breath and they're also having a cough. So typically fever, cough, and shortness of breath are the three symptoms you want to look out for in this case. But again, what's confusing about this right now is that it's the end of flu season. And then on top of that, it's the beginning of allergy season. And I'm in upstate New York right now, but I know in Atlanta, the pollen is probably coating the cars with this kind of fine yellow mist. So what's happening is that we're having to explain to people, and there are good infographics that do this, but comparing just plain old allergies with the flu, with COVID-19 or the coronavirus. And the thing is, if it's allergy, you may get a stuffy nose, you may have a dry cough, itchy eyes. If you have the flu, it's going to be fever, muscle aches, headaches, and fatigue, maybe a sore throat. And with COVID-19, it's going to be basically fever, shortness of breath, and cough. So those are kind of the differences that you look at. But you can see just from me explaining that small part, it gets a little bit confusing to the general public. And of course, when you have a symptom like a cough, which you can get in allergies, and if someone has allergies, seasonal allergies to pollen or ragweed, and then they have asthma, they may start coughing as well. Mm-hmm. And so people with a cough, and if you're a little bit short of breath, which can happen in asthma as well, people are going to get concerned and immediately make a beeline to this is going to be COVID-19 because that's all you're hearing in the media.
Having had pneumonia before, it sounds a lot like the symptoms of a pneumonia sort of scenario, right?
Yeah, it's similar to pneumonia in those respects, like the fever, the cough, the shortness of breath. But with pneumonia, you may have more of a productive cough, traditionally, the traditional pneumonia. There's also walking pneumonia where you don't really have those traditional signs. But yes, when coronavirus gets in your system, it can attack the lungs and it can cause a viral form of pneumonia. And that's what's causing a lot of people to have to be hospitalized and have to be put on ventilators, those kind of things.
Okay. Our government right now is very interesting, for lack of a better term, in their response to the whole situation. In terms of the other countries who have really jumped all over it. I saw some statistics about Italy, and although they have a high infection rate, they also have a very high recovery rate because I guess they really kind of got on top of it or in front of it, as it were. But to that, I've heard just some really kind of disturbing, not even conspiracy theory, because we'll talk about that, but just disparaging comments about the origins of it, calling it the Wuhan flu or things like that, which get to be very racist in context. But would you be able to shed any light on like where it originated, and then we can maybe where and how?
And so, I mean, the speculation from the reports that we've heard, it was some kind of animal handler in Wuhan, China, and then somehow got exposed to the virus, and then it became aerosolized, and now it's in respiratory droplets, and it's going human to human, where I guess before we had only seen it from animal to human. So that's supposedly where it was picked up. And again, kind of what you're talking about, this whole thing, Trump had put out a tweet the other day saying, the Chinese virus, and that's very intentional. We have to be mindful of what he's doing when he does that, because he's when he has the teleprompter, he's saying all these wonderful things in these White House briefings and in these meetings on the front lawn, but then he goes and tweets Chinese virus. Now, what I responded in my tweet to that was, so we can call syphilis the European bacteria, because syphilis, we all know, came from Europe. So why don't we just call it the European bacteria and define that as syphilis? So he's again trying to divide things with this. So a lot of times when I think about these things, we talk about where it comes from. A lot of people still pontificate about where HIV came from, and that's still controversial, where HIV actually originated. And you'll find different origin theories with that too. My point with all this is that I usually try to get people to focus on, okay, we have it here in our country now. So what are we going to do?
Right.
And we know the facts are the first case in the United States was in mid-January. And back then, Trump wasn't paying attention to it. Our government had a completely illogical response. He was at rallies calling it a Democratic hoax. He had already dismantled the pandemic response team that Barack Obama had constructed back in 2018. And he knew about it back then, but he has a video where he says, I'm a businessman. I don't think we need to have all these people there if we can just call them when we need them in an emergency. And then he kept denying it and denying it and denying it. When the ships came forth from the cruises and they had all these sick people who were testing positive, he wanted to keep them sequestered in a way because then it would keep down the numbers. And so we didn't get to testing for COVID-19 until this very week. So that's important for people to know, is that we probably had 2 months, maybe even longer, where we've had people exposed to this and may have had people sick, because as a lot of healthcare professionals will tell you, a lot of times we will diagnose people with the flu without having the nasal swab confirmation. So we won't actually have a positive test, but we base it on the clinical symptoms because we're so familiar with it. And so you can say, well, there's 30,000, or sometimes people say 60,000. It'll vary how many cases we have, but they say they died of the flu. And what I'm thinking at this point is that there may have been cases that we called the flu, that we didn't have a positive test result, that may actually have been coronavirus back then, and we just didn't know about. And so the problem with this whole rollout with the government is, while they were sitting last week patting themselves on the back and saying things like, oh, we're getting out the testing, the test kits weren't getting to anyone outside of the Department of Health. And I heard a lot of anecdotal stories from people trying to go to their private physicians, Department of Health, emergency rooms, and being turned away because they didn't meet the classic triad of symptoms. And we know a lot more now in the fact that, and the reason why they were turned away is that they didn't have enough tests. Everyone was behind the 8 ball with this. And so now we actually have this together, and we're starting to test this week. We're going to see the cases really start to ramp up right now. And so people are going to get scared because the cases are going to get in probably the tens of thousands. I wouldn't be alarmed by that right now because it's going to come down. But the reason why it's going to jump that high is because we weren't testing before. And now when you all of a sudden start testing for a virus where people do have a pre-symptomatic phase. So as opposed to what you hear a lot in the media where people are saying, okay, you've got to have a fever, got to have a cough, got to have shortness of breath, and got to have an exposure with a known contact or someone who was diagnosed positive as COVID-19 or had traveled to Iran, Japan, China, South Korea. What we're seeing right now is people are being admitted to hospitals who are younger, in their 30s and 40s, and have no known exposure. And so when you have this going on, you realize they're starting to find out that there's a pre-symptomatic phase. If the incubation period is between 2 and 14 days with an average of 5, people are going to walk around without symptoms for a couple days, and the virus can still shed while they are walking around without symptoms. So why people are shutting down everything right now is because it's important. People could be running around with absolutely zero symptoms. And when they have zero symptoms, they think, oh, I'm fine, I'm not sick, but they're actually shedding the virus. And in that respect, it's very much like a herpes virus, where people can shed herpes virus from genital herpes, but not have any physical rash going on. So that's important to note because they still can be infectious. So I just had a conversation with someone on social media recently that said, well, why are you inconveniencing all these people? And if they're not directly affected, it doesn't seem sustainable to shut down all these businesses and keep everybody sequestered and doing this physical distancing thing. Why are we doing that? And I'm saying, well, if older people are more likely to die, people over 60 and with other kinds of conditions, if someone who's in their 20s and 30s gets it and they're like, oh, I feel fine, but they're running around and shedding the virus, and then they get in close contact with their grandmother or a parent who is older and who does have problems, then all of a sudden that person risks having a much more serious consequence from COVID-19 than the 20 to 30-year-old who just caught it and then had a mild illness, if any at all, and then it just passed through their symptoms. So it's very, very problematic. And a lot of problems have been going on with people blaming the media, people saying that people are stupid to be so hysterical. And yes, it is kind of crazy that people are buying up all the toilet paper at Kroger and Walmart and Target and all that stuff. That's one thing in and of itself. But when you look under it, people have the right to be scared and people have the right to be fearful because this is a new virus. We don't know much about it. And all we've been getting from the White House has been denial, calling it a hoax, and contradictory and inconsistent messaging almost on a daily basis. So when you have the kind of leadership that is flubbing around with this and doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, of course the American people are going to be scared. So I don't blame the American people at all. The key is that you should have a healthy amount of fear or caution about a new and novel virus about this that we don't know too much about. And you should listen to the CDC and public health officials and not listen to politicians all the time. Listen to the public health officials and then use that fear to drive your common sense. But don't let it paralyze you. Don't let it put you in a state of hysteria, but realize that a little bit of fear or caution probably is going to help you do some smart things, but don't let it go overboard. Mm-hmm. I know I talked a lot there, but
no, I think that's fine.
Kind of what we're seeing with all this.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. I wanted you to talk about the whole politicized conversation because right. I think for me, that's the dangerous part.
It's hugely dangerous, yeah.
Listening to politicians pontificate about something that probably 9.5 times out of 10 they know nothing about right. is tremendously dangerous. And when it's a situation like this, like you said, we don't know much about it. The doctors don't know much about it. So if the experts don't know much about it, then to have politicians deciding the fate of what happens, it turns out to be a quite dangerous situation.
Yeah, and people don't understand that this is public health 101. This and I use the phrase physical distancing instead of social distancing, because what we're talking about is keeping away from people. And they usually say you want to keep people about 6 feet away from you or further in order so if they cough or if they sneeze, you don't get those droplets on you and it reduces the chance of transmission. Because it's not social distancing, because you and I are being social right now. Doing this show, we're having a conversation. We can still use our phones. We can still do other telemedicine. We can do other kinds of things through social media and technology that allows us to be social. But it's the physical distancing that's important because we are so behind the 8 ball. We're about 2 months behind the 8 ball. We're just getting caught up right now. The stuff we're doing right now, we should have been doing 6 to 8 weeks ago. And so right now we're behind the curve. and we're trying to catch up. But all you hear from the White House is what a wonderful job, how tremendous this is, how unprecedented this is. And it is unprecedented how big of a mess up they have made this, when it actually, if they had listened to the public health officials from the beginning, this could have been a much smoother ride. And if they had communicated this with more transparency and honesty, we would have had less hysteria than we do right now.
Let the public health officials lead the way.
Let them do their job. Let them do their job.
Absolutely. So we don't really know, I guess with illnesses like the flu or pneumonia or whatever, you kind of know at what period a person is contagious and that kind of thing. So with this, we don't have any of that kind of information yet, do we?
No, we're still learning a little bit of it, but there have been some studies, like I said, talking about how when people don't have symptoms, they are still shedding the virus when they first get exposed. Mm-hmm. So the duration of the incubation period, and by incubation period, you mean the time when a bacteria or virus gets in your system before it actually manifests physical symptoms. It's a range between as early as 2 days to as late as 14 days. And the average is around 5 days. So that we do know about this. And we also know that a lot of this virus will cause people to have mild disease, but it won't actually cause them to be hospitalized. It won't cause serious complications like pneumonia and having to be intubated and put on a breathing machine. For the vast majority of people, they won't get that sick. But for people who are older, who have compromised immune systems, whether it be HIV and they're not on their medications, or they had a transplant and are on steroids or chronic steroids for an autoimmune condition, or diabetes or chronic kidney disease, those are COPD, we talk about those kind of things, those people are going to be at higher risk. And one of the interesting studies that I saw today, or bar graphs, was comparing Italy with China with regards to who was getting coronavirus by age group. And what was striking in it was that in China, there were a lot of younger people in their 20s to 50s who were getting coronavirus. But the people but they had a smaller mortality rate, a lower mortality rate. And in Italy, they had a higher mortality rate because they had much more older people above their 60s who were getting corona. So the important message to give out to there is people can get it regardless of their age. Don't think because you're in your 20s that you're not going to get it and you're not going to get sick. The take-home message should be, at the end of the day, if you are older and if you do have other medical conditions or your immune system is weakened for some reason, then you may be at higher risk that if you get exposed to coronavirus, that you'll have a higher likelihood to get sick and possibly die because of it. So that's why we need to be careful. And it all has to be public health. It all has to be the community, not thinking about yourself and if you're directly impacted at all, but think about everybody else in your family, in your community, in the entire world. So this is not the time, which is completely un-American, to actually think about community first. American ideals are usually wrapped around individuality and selfishness. And so this is really a test for America that's based on white supremacy, capitalism, and me first. This is a public health emergency, and the virus doesn't care about the color of your skin or white privilege or how much money you make. The virus is going to do what the virus is going to do. So we have to pay attention to the basic public health tenets and follow those. And if people can get their heads out of their asses and just listen to the public health officials, this may be over in a couple months. If they don't, it could drag on a lot longer.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's the whole thing is, again, the public health officials don't have the microphone. So, so it's hard for the accurate messaging to get out when, you have all this bluster coming from the White House about, how he feels or, whatever side of the bed he woke up on or, whatever that, turns out to be. And that's, like I said, that's just dangerous.
It is.
There is a, and I don't, mean to get too crazy with. I don't want people to get freaked out. But there's a website that Microsoft has. It's a bing.com/COVID, and if you want to go there, it's called the COVID-19 tracker, and it actually tracks cases all over the world. But it's very hopeful in a lot of ways because it's showing the countries that actually have. While they have high infection rates, it's also showing high recovery rates Like I said, I talked about Italy.
Hmm.
But you're not seeing that here. And then that messaging just says, like you said, where we are behind the eight ball, and we're way behind the eight ball. I talked to one of the producers when I came in tonight about testing. I don't know anybody who's been tested. I mean,
Right.
I'm not Michael Jackson or anything like that, but I mean, I know a lot of people, and
Right.
I don't know anyone who's been tested. I had
And
a doctor's appointment this past Friday. Not only
hmm
was I not tested, nobody asked me about it. Nobody presented and it's at Emory. It's a very reputable medical establishment. I mean, had there been testing available, I'm sure they would have offered it to me, but there was no
right.
conversation regarding that.
Right.
And this was the day before the world in Georgia anyway shut
Right.
down, and
Right.
so I understand what you mean when you say that once the testing starts, the infection rate is going to spike because we don't even know what's going on with us at this
Yeah.
point, right?
Yeah, and testing is the key. Once you start to identify how many cases there are, who is being hospitalized, how severe the illness is, who is dying from a disease. You can also break down according to age, race, gender, medical conditions, underlying medical conditions. You can get a lot of information from that. But we've stalled for so long with just getting the test. And that's the crazy thing, is that America should have a public health system that looks out for its citizens. And we should be prepared for something like this because we knew it was coming 2 months ago. And it shouldn't have taken the private industry, like we were talking about Quest and LabCorp and other things like that, jumping in last week to bail out the president because he fumbled up the response so badly. I mean, this is really, really not how you want to investigate a pandemic, or not how you want to handle a pandemic response. And you still have people today who are like, well, we're still going to hold this event and we're still going to do this. And I'm like, has anyone learned anything? But I mean, people are going to have to learn the hard way. So, unless it happens to them, there are people on social media, they're saying, this is really not a big deal. And I'm like, okay, if you
Yeah.
guys want to do it like this, but that's how a lot of people are looking at it. And because they're getting their cues from the person in the White House, and that's problematic.
Yeah, the Ebola response, which was I guess, signaled the creation of the pandemic response team,
Hmm.
should, I know this is really turning into a conversation that's less than an interview, but should have been able to lead the way into how to handle a pandemic situation. But then you have a, person who dismantles the pandemic
Right.
response team and then disavowed any knowledge of it. And I was so proud of Yamiche Alexander the other day. I got to see that in real time as she called him to task for it.
Yep.
And he still denied it and called it a nasty question. That's a
I know.
nasty question.
I
Um,
know.
that, but he said it was a nasty question, but said he didn't know anything about it. And that, again, these kinds of responses are dangerous. And I
Yeah.
hope that people are paying attention, especially in this election season, the danger of having a quote unquote leader in the White House who will boldface lie about something so crucial
Hmm.
to the American public health.
Hmm.
This is a life or death situation, and
Absolutely.
he's playing games with his ego in
Right.
charge, and that's I don't want to go off on a tangent, but that really just it bothers me that people can still support or endorse that sort of behavior,
Hmm.
even if it befalls them physically or financially. It's a terrible thing. I'm watching people's careers and lives be shuttered this week. My husband's gig is canceled for another month. I mean, he can't
Hmm.
travel, can't work. What do you
Hmm.
do financially? And then they're playing games with, these big spending bills. They want to give the airline industry $15 billion without having anyone to account for what happens with that money. When we
Right.
always know that, there's that golden parachute just
Right.
waiting to happen.
Right.
Will any of that money trickle down to your regular local flight attendant
Right.
who's sitting at the airport with no
Right.
flights?
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, there's so much that's not being addressed in that sort of situation when we start talking about the government's part in it all.
Yeah, and you don't have to apologize about having a political conversation when it comes to public health in a pandemic, especially in a democracy, because that's what public health institutions are for. That's part of what our tax dollars should pay for. So when this doesn't happen and instead it becomes a quote unquote partnership between public and private sector, you know things are just becoming more privatized. And when it becomes more privatized, there's always the influence of profit. And when you are sacrificing the public health of a country for the sake of profit, which at the end of the day, corporate businesses are seeking, that becomes problematic. There's nothing wrong with capitalism and people trying to make money. But when it comes at the expense of an adequate handling of a public health pandemic, that's when it's problematic.
That's an oligarchy. Am I correct? Would you have, it's run by the money and not by the people. It's not a democracy anymore at that point, so. And people, this is where we find ourselves. If you're not paying attention, if you're just voting because someone hates who you hate, then this is the kind of situation that you run into, because not only do they hate who you hate, 9 times out of 10, they probably hate you too. So,
Right.
because that's how hate works.
Right.
So can you speak to two things? One, because of your background in HIV, how this could affect that population, the population of HIV positive people, A, and B, to the mental aspects of it all, because it's such a mental drain, just totally, just on everyone.
Yeah. Those are great points to bring up. I mean, the first thing about people living with HIV, I remember it was probably about a week and a half ago when it first started. I started getting texts from people, and I started seeing on social media, people were calling me out like, David, are you going to say something about, what about people with HIV? What is their risk? What's going to happen? And I want to point your viewers to 2 articles, one of which I was directly involved with, the other I was not. But if you're looking about the intersection of coronavirus, and if you're living with HIV and you have questions, we did an article for thebody.com. And so you can check on their website, and there's an article there about coronavirus and living with HIV. And then also pause.com has a great article as well. And the main take home points, I'll try to keep this brief, is that you think about these with common principles, and the same thing, you're looking at everything else. So I tell people who are living with HIV, if you're on your meds, stay on your meds, keep your T cell count high, keep your viral load undetectable. If you can, whether you get from private insurance, the AIDS Drug Assistance Program, Ryan White, Medicaid, Medicare, see if you can call your doctor's office or your clinician's office and get a 2 or 3 month supply if that's possible. I hear that a lot of the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmacies are working together to try to bring some relief while people are staying inside for an undetermined period of time. So they do have home delivery systems with a lot of pharmacies. So check with your doctor's office and see exactly what's going on with that. The other things like getting enough sleep, checking on your mental health, exercising when you can, eating the right foods, all these other things are things that you can help yourself with that'll help boost your immune system and protect you. And then also the basic things that we say for everybody: washing your hands, staying away from crowded situations. If you're coughing, or if you're in a situation where people are going to be coughing, tell them to cough into their sleeve or cough somewhere else. Don't cough into their hands, or don't just cough out, because that's where the droplets will spread. And so those kind of things are also helpful as well. I think the question that you had with the mental health is really important. And I saw a really great video this morning that Johnny Cornegay and Leo Moore, who's a physician out in LA with the LA County Department of Health, did on coronavirus. And Leo gave a great shout out to Yolo Akili and his organization, BEAM, BEAM, which stands for, I think, Black Empowerment and Mental Health. And so if you go on their website for BEAM, and they have different chat spaces, and I think YOLO deals with a lot of kind of trauma and mental health among Black communities in general. But I think he's been tailoring a lot of stuff because people are really stressed about this coronavirus thing. It's on the news every single day. People are losing their jobs. People are being pushed out of work. People are isolating themselves, staying by themselves, cooped up in their house, unsure about what's going on, scared about the lack of information or contradictory information that we're getting from the media and from our authorities. And so it's really putting a strain on a lot of people. And so those kind of local resources should be helpful in order to connect people, especially in a digital age. And what I tell people, and again, going back to what I said, people will use the phrase social distancing. And a brilliant epidemiologist and the head of Albany Medical Center over here, his name is David Holtgrave, sent out a tweet that said it should be said that it's physical distancing. And again, I can't stress that enough. The physical distancing is one thing, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to be connected with the people you love. So reach out on FaceTime, reach out on the phone. If you have family members or friends and you're staying in the same house, do things that are common. Play spades, binge a Netflix show together, watch a movie, do these kind of things that keep you connected, even when there's a risk of isolation. So I think our mental health is very important in these times. And we have to kind of lean on that and look for resources in the area that can kind of help us with that in this moment where we're physically distancing ourselves from other people, but we still can connect socially in other ways.
I think to your point, the technology now, I'm sure we've in centuries past had to deal with the pandemic specter, as it were, but the technology now makes it so, hey, you're in the house, get your family in Nebraska on the FaceTime, and
Absolutely.
and you haven't seen them and you haven't talked to them. It's the
Absolutely.
perfect time to reach out. You know what I mean? So, and also you spoke, and of course, Johnny and I are very close, but you spoke about Leo Moore, who I just became familiar with through your Facebook, actually, because he was posting some very, very, very cool things, and I mean really, really cool. And so one of them he did a 30 things to do while
I
you're
saw that.
Okay, so I actually created a webpage, and it's called 30 Really Cool Things to Do While on Corona Break. Hey,
Love it.
look, you got to look at
I
the
love
bright side of this thing. We're going to be sequestered like this.
Right.
I take no credit for it. It says courtesy of Dr. Leo Moore, Chief Physician at Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. And just really, really cool stuff, like sit out on your front porch or your backyard and grill for yourself or the family or the roommates you live with. Avoid inviting others over at this time, but play games, video board games, phone games, color with coloring books and colored pencils or crayons, and finally read that book you've been putting off for years. Lord knows, I think there's a name for people like me who have like all these books to make your library look really good. You've read like 2 of them. So, but yeah, all of these things, learn a new language online, reconnect with friends or family on video or regular telephone, like we just spoke about. All
Absolutely.
these kinds of things, which I'm telling my mom, it's like, because she's dreadfully afraid, I'm going to be in the house. And I'm like, well, there's all these things that you can do. You don't have to just be in the house and shut down. Personally,
Right.
a little testimony on my side. I think we talked about it, but I am doing the Berkeley College of Music Business degree program. So Lord knows I got stuff. And I'm going to be using this Corona break time, hashtag Corona break, y'all. We're going to make that happen. But I'm going to be using the time to get caught up. I got behind doing this show, doing my band. Needless to say, the band's not working right now, so that's shut down, and I have time to get caught up. I have no excuse to do that. But these kinds of things to really, write that script you've been waiting to write, or get that book done, or whatever it is. You really. We have to look at this as, it's kind of a bad situation, in terms of the fact that we can't work, we're not going to work and those sorts of things. But we have time now. We're always crying about we don't have time. We don't have time to do certain things. You've got time. Use the time. And I think that kind of speaks to that mental health portion as well, the mental wellness portion, that we can pour our time into those things that we've been maybe either putting off or delaying or whatever that might look like. And so, to your point, I think that the more that you kind of use the mental capacity, it kind of helps with everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and Leo has been amazing ever since, this thing kind of really started to take off and people finally started to pay attention. Leo's been posting on his social media accounts, whether it be Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, and just reminding people about a lot of the basic stuff.
Yeah.
Wash your hands, don't panic, don't run and buy out all the paper towels and toilet paper. Like, think about the basic stuff. And I think on a lot of levels, like, people are looking at this like, folks in America can be pretty damn nasty. And you see folks going in bathrooms and coming out of the stalls after taking a crap and not washing their hands and just walking out into the airport. And I mean, if the silver lining with this coronavirus is that folks will learn to wash their hands and stop being so damn nasty, I'm all for it. So I think we got to remember some of the basic stuff and just kind of remember some of the things that are considerate for other people and will help other people not get sick. And will help us all maintain a pretty healthy community rather than just thinking, well, I don't care, I don't feel bad, so this, that, and the other. But Leo's been really amazing with getting a lot of that medical information out there that I think people are forgetting in this whole hysterical environment.
Yeah, hard lesson to learn, but a good lesson to learn in a lot of ways. And I think I would add to that, if we could all just be considerate of other people, let's not just wipe out the supermarket shelves knowing that there's some old lady somewhere that might want a roll of paper towel too, or some hand sanitizer too. There are families out here who are trying to get along. And speaking to that point, and I know we're short on time here, but
Right.
anybody who's watching this right now, if you don't get a chance to get the information from the lower third of the screen, I'm going to offer some information about the kids who are out of school, who only get fed at school. The Atlanta Public Schools, the DeKalb County Schools, Cobb County, Rockdale, Clayton, they all have information about where your kids can go and get free meals. They can still get free meals during the day, and I'll give all of that information so that we can all access that, because that's really, really important, because the kids are out of school, the parents are trying to figure out what to do. And so that's a point too. I got to ask my producer something. Kush, we got time to do that game? David Milbranch, you get to do Think Fast with No Better with Kipper Jones.
Fair enough.
You're going to love this. You got 60 seconds.
Okay.
I'm going to shoot some questions at you real fast, and I'm going to want some your best David Milbranch answers. You ready?
Okay.
All right. We got it up, Kush? All right. You let me know where we're going. You count me down.
I'm scared.
No, don't be scared. It's fun. It's painless. This has been a heavy conversation. I just want to lighten the mood a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You ready? All right. Let me know. Go. Okay. What was the first concert you went to and when?
Whitney Houston, 1985.
Okay. And your mama and your
Goody Bob. And your cousin too.
Mac or PC?
PC.
Wine, red or white? Who said education and work are the levers to uplift the people?
Damn, I don't know.
W.E.B. Du Bois. Sexual Chocolate is from what movie?
What happened?
Sexual Chocolate is from what movie?
Oh, that's from Coming to America.
Bonus point. Who said it?
Who said it?
Yeah.
Oh, that was the character Seven. When he was playing the actor.
6, 5,
Arsenio Hall.
4,
No. Time's up, buddy.
Wait, but it was sexual child. What was his name? Did he have a name?
He had a
What's
name.
his
It's
name?
Randy
Sexual-
Watson.
Oh, damn. I don't remember that name.
David
And I love that
Milbranch,
book.
thank you, man. Thank you so very much. I appreciate you for doing this. You're just an awesome human being. You've poured your life into helping other people, and I appreciate you very much. So thank you, and thank you for doing this for me.
It was an honor to be on here. You know, you just had to ask, and I was going to come on here.
Thank you, brother. Listen, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. This has been No Better with Kipper Jones. I want to thank the staff here at Status Network. You guys are awesome for giving me the opportunity. I have to thank my sponsor, Rodney Henson and Henson Security Services. Thank my manager, Johnny Cornegay, for always keeping me together. Thank David for sharing me with the world. And listen, while we're doing all of this physical distancing and whatnot, stay as connected as you can. Stay as connected as you can to everyone that you can stay connected to. We have technology that allows us to do that. And I just have to ask you to take care of yourselves and take care of each other. God bless you. God keep you is my prayer. Until next time, this is Kipper Jones, and you've been watching No Better.
And cut.
The views and opinions expressed on No Better are those of its host and guest and do not reflect those of the Status Network or any of its affiliates. The views and opinions expressed on No Better are those of its host and guest and do not reflect those of the Status Network or any of its affiliates. No Better with Kipper Jones is sponsored by Henson Security Services. Protecting what you value most is what we do best.